Was an odd moment. It's a moment that harkens of, Joe Biden's creepiness. You used the word creepiness. This is truly creepy at its best. And you'll recall, and Americans have become familiar with this, that there's a distance generally between members of the royal family. And this underlines that, Harry is no longer a working member of the royal family, but still, you'll recall on Queen Elizabeth's visit, sometimes there were some exuberant people that had a lot of affection for her when she was meeting them publicly in America, and they would throw their arms around her, and that was, but she had the decorum not to recoil. But Harry is the opposite end of the spectrum. He's actually, leeching on to this woman in a most unseemly way. Once again, I have to say, wasn't raised like that. What's happened to this chap's judgment?
The mainstream media are so in cahoots with Harry and Meghan these days. They are providing pure propaganda of the Sussexes' fake, phony, false, take your pick, non-royal tour to Colombia. But here on Outspoken, you get the real story the MSM won't tell you. So joining me today to pick apart the massive PR operation to convince the world that Harry and Meghan are a happy couple and some sort of new political force is Lee Cohen, the US-based royal and political columnist for Fox News and the Daily Telegraph. So Lee, look, this tour is a propaganda operation, pure and simple. The Colombian government won't say who's paying for it, but they claim it's through international cooperation. The Sussexes were invited by the country's vice president, Garcia Marquez, who is an anti-colonial leader, one of the world's biggest proponents for reparations. In fact, she even set up a national commission about repaying the historical debt that she thinks is owed. More so, no media was allowed inside their tightly controlled events, with copy and picture releases being controlled by the government and the Sussexes. So, Lee, this may have looked like a royal tour on the surface, but it was nothing of the sort, was it?
Dan, make no mistake, this has nothing to do with being a royal tour. The Sussex tour of Colombia has been nothing more than a cringeworthy display of virtue signaling and identity politics, broadcasting their narcissism and hypocrisy to anyone who will tune in. The result is demeaning and embarrassing to the Sussexes' image rather than bolstering. Harry and Meghan either can't see, Dan, or don't care that they have been used as pawns by a Colombian government eager to distract from its corruption scandals, civil unrest, and drug trafficking, to create a false image of stability through the fact of the contrived royal tour that is nothing of the sort in reality.
Amen. I couldn't agree with that more, Lee. So look, let's pick it apart, because I actually think that they are happy to be used as pawns, Harry and Meghan, as long as they are able to get out their own victimhood narrative. So, of course, we had so much of that. Speaking at a conference about Afro women and power in Cali, Meghan, well, yet again, she offended the royal family by leaving out both Catherine, the Princess of Wales, and Queen Camilla, not to mention the late Queen Elizabeth II, out of a speech where she was praising strong women. Watch.
Of the strong women that are around me, of course, my mother being one of them. I think life is full of surprises and can be quite complex. And we've talked about over the past few days you finding your inspiration in this fighting spirit. And for me, we talked about the power of words as well. So much of how I approach things is through the lens of less about the fight, that's not interesting to me, and more about how do we show up in this space and wash things over with love and kindness and generosity. And we talked about this the other day, and of course that is part of that same spirit that you have in you. You see something wrong, you go to fix it. Maybe that's just a very female thing, whether it's a fan or something else. That's what we do, right? As women, we're multitaskers and we are fixers. And so when I try to look at the conditions in which will make women most comfortable in the space. That's multifaceted, and that includes finding ways to create political space where women's voices can be heard, in obviously business where women can have a seat at the table and be in positions of leadership, having examples as you do with your vice president of the strong women.
I mean, Lee, seriously? The fight is not interesting for me, says Meghan. She wants love and kindness and generosity. Who does she think she's kidding?
When, Dan, has Meghan ever given love, kindness, and generosity to members of her husband's family, and indeed her own family? Her father, her 80-something-year-old father, who's been unwell, she's been estranged from, and her children have not even met. So when she talks about love, kindness, and generosity, and so too, Dan, I love it when she lumps all women into what women are in, a classic identitarian method. All women aren't the same, like all of any group aren't the same. And she's oversimplifying, and she's quite honestly insulting the public's intelligence.
She is. She absolutely is. Now, look, she referred there briefly to the fan. Well, this was the moment that she was referring to.
Meghan no aguantó el calor de Cali.
Mujeres ayudando mujeres. Muy bien, muchas gracias. Y además resolviendo la situación. Muchísimas gracias.
Meghan.
So it was very hot. She was very sweaty. And clearly she wasn't happy with the positioning of the family. What did you make of that?
Well, I think this is classic. Everything has to be choreographed, and everything has to be done her way. She's not there, in the spirit of the event. She's there to promote her own image, and that's what she's going to do. And, the couple in particular, Meghan, Dan, their portrayal by the host, Francia Marquez, the first Black vice president. Why does everyone have to say that? I think that's insulting to black people and to women. Why can't she just be the first? Anyway, is she not good enough on her own to not need those identitarian?
Totally, I hate it. I hate this world of identity politics. Anytime anyone gets a job, is nominated for anything, they always have to be the first something. It is ludicrous. It is so frustrating, but we know that's what Meghan buys into. And the fact that Meghan and Harry are even prepared to be next to this woman, who we know wants to bring in reparations and effectively hates everything that Harry's family ever stood for, is quite something. But look, as Meghan went on, Lee, there was a real irony in this speech, because she talked about suffering in silence and sitting in silence in moments that you want to be heard. And of course, it was quite rightly pointed out that her staff members, the Sussex Survivors Squad, have to sit in silence because they are all captured by these NDAs that they've had to sign. And there's also an incredible moment here where Meghan talks about how her young daughter, Lilibet, 3 years old, has now found her feminist voice. Yep, you couldn't make this up. Watch.
I think in the small ways that women are doing that each day, and in the larger ways that we're doing that as a community, those are the elements that continue to inspire me to use my voice, because I also recognize how small it feels when you don't. It doesn't feel great to, as we've talked about, suffer in silence, or even just sit in silence, if in those moments you want to be heard, or if you have something to say. So I think part of the role modeling that I certainly try to do as a mother is to encourage our daughter, who at 3, she has found her voice. And we're so proud of that, because that is how we, as I was saying, create the conditions in which there's a ripple effect of young girls and young women knowing that if someone else is encouraging them to use their voice and be heard, that's what they're going to do, and they're going to create a very different environment than so many of us grew up in, where our voices were meant to be smaller. And now, in raising them, we're changing the conditions in the environment where everyone has space to be the best version of themselves.
God, that was an underwhelming applause, even from her acolytes in the room. So let's look at two of those points, Lee. First up, 3-year-old Lilibet has found her voice. Look, we're all proud of our kids, right? But isn't that ludicrous to suggest that somehow a 3-year-old has bought into this woke ideology?
Well, only Harry and Meghan's child could have such a voice, and it's probably it's definitely stated by their mother, because most 3-year-olds I know, the only voice they have is to express they want this Barbie or that Lego. It's absolutely ludicrous that she is projecting this her ideological agenda on a 3-year-old child, Dan.
No, it really is. And then, as Freedom007 tweeted, or posted on X, I should say, Meghan Markle has the audacity to sit there and say women shouldn't suffer in silence and use their voice when she has female staff sign NDAs who can't speak out on her bullying them, who have and are suffering in silence. Good point, isn't it? Meghan's hypocrisy exposed once more.
I mean, the hypocrisy never ends. Yes, and we saw what are there now? 18 members, former members of the Sussexes staff who have resigned, including their chief of staff, who was there for 3 months. And all of these people, of course, have legally binding legal agreements to not reveal the condition under which they worked under these what appeared to be toxic work environment.
Yeah.
So as you point out, it's terribly hypocritical. Not only that, I can't help but thinking when I hear about Meghan talking about expressing her voice, that she's still whinging against what she felt she couldn't do when she was a working member of the royal family. She's really got a chip on her shoulder about that.
Yes, she does. She does, although I love this moment where she just gets so annoyed when Harry dares to speak, because this was definitely the Meghan tour. Harry was a bit part. And it feels like, Lee, we are entering, scarily, into a new chapter of Meghan. I mean, firstly, I feel like her speeches could be written by AI. You know, you could type in, can someone talk woke Californian mumbo jumbo, and what would be spat out would be the sort of absolute rubbish that Meghan delivers on stage. But perhaps most scarily, she spoke about in Colombia, decided to announce in Colombia that her intentionality, Lee, is to now enter a chapter of joy in her life. Watch.
From my standpoint, how I will continue to express this, both through our foundation and through being able to move through the world, I suppose, is just looking at this as my chapter of joy. And the more that you are able to look at your life and really truly recognize that if you're going to be grateful for your life, you have to be grateful for all aspects of it. The parts that were opportunities of growth and may have felt really difficult, as well as the parts that feel inspiring, joyful, and full. And I think part of the role modeling doesn't necessarily need to be a large plan, it just needs to be an intention. And my intentionality is to enjoy this chapter and to be able to move through every piece of that as best as I can, modeling that if we are in the spirit of gratitude and of generosity, how we are able to connect with each other as women, how we are able to move through the world in a much freer way, I think is part of how we continue to create the conditions I was speaking about earlier. And you may have noticed it, my husband and I were talking about it this morning. I've just really relaxed on this trip. That's probably because it's Colombia and you all know how to have fun. But there's been something really, that's true. There's something so liberating about being able to be yourself and be comfortable in your skin and be surrounded in a space that is excited to see you exactly the way that you are. And so I think that is part of the chapter for me of joy that will hopefully continue to inspire and allow me to keep doing the work that we love to do, which is to just be of service and see other people live their lives through that same joyful spirit.
Of course, Lee, dig after dig after dig after dig there at the British royal family, because the implication is I was never able to be myself when I was in the UK. Absolute rubbish, given that the members of the royal family and the courtiers bent over backwards to try and make Meghan feel comfortable. But putting that to one side, I find it really difficult to hear someone talk about entering their spirit of joy, wanting to live a life where you can actually look back at the past and think, that happened, it wasn't a great period, but I learned from it, when she is still punishingly her own father, seriously ill, doesn't have that long left, lives just down the road from her, yet she will not go to visit him. Not far from Colombia to Mexico, also not far from Montecito to Mexico. So I find all of this talk so hypocritical given the way that she lives her life.
Absolutely, Dan, and you know, you pointed out that she rails against not being her authentic self. You know, when she was marrying Prince Harry during their wedding, as I recall, the British royal family and the British people bent over backwards to salute her American and sort of biracial heritage, in the American minister that they had in the gospel choir, all those things, and those were salutes to her rather than anything else. And so that's thing number one. You know, that's completely hypocritical if she is taking a dig in that way, that she couldn't be herself. They were celebrating her diversity, not trying to hide it or conceal it. And then I can't help thinking, Dan, when she talks about joy, this is a theme that I wonder if it was somehow choreographed or coordinated with Kamala Harris, the candidate for U.S. president, was running on a similar theme of joy, you know, as if, you know, everything in the past was all dark and the things on the other side of the forces of darkness. And now here I am representing joy. And, you know, Meghan led a life that most people would give their eye teeth to experience as a member of the royal family. What could be more joyful than bringing joy to people's lives through public service, shining a light on others, etc. But you know, this is completely at odds with what she's saying, as usual.
Yeah, it is. And at the end of the day, both Kamala and Meghan need to realize we know about the past 4 years. We're not just going to erase the past 4 years. Kamala, you have been the vice president that caused this mess in the US. And Meghan, you were the nasty person who caused this utter hell and misery for the royal family for the past 4 years. So you don't just get to decide that now it's all going to be about joy, because your actions have meant actually that a lot of people, including the late Prince Philip, including the late Queen Elizabeth II, actually were on their deathbed not feeling joy because of the false claims that you made about them. So I think they can't just decide. We decide actually based on their actions. But look, there was a moment when Harry and Meghan were on stage together in front of a large crowd, and Meghan became Harry's interpreter.
Buenas noches, Cali. Buenas noches, Colombia. Muchas gracias, señora vicepresidenta. Can you help me translate?
Of course, claro que sí.
Thank you for your warm welcome.
Gracias por su cálida bienvenida.
Thank you for your beautiful culture.
Gracias por su cultura hermosa.
And thank you for your incredible hospitality.
Y mil gracias por su hospitalidad increíble. Me siento igual. Muchísimas gracias a todos y todas y disfruten la noche.
She's very proud of herself, Lee. It should be pointed out that the reason that Meghan can speak Spanish is because of the time that she spent in Argentina, thanks to a relative connected to her father, who she has now ditched since entering the royal family. So that's worth pointing out. Meghan's mole also tweeted saying, "I sincerely hope the Home Office is paying attention to what Prince Harry, the privileged moron who complains about not being safe and requires 24/7 protection, is standing on stage in front of 10,000 plus people." What do you make of it, Lee?
That. Let's go back to first principles. In Harry's campaign seeking enhanced security, saying that he won't bring his family. It's too dangerous to bring his family to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom, a place that I've never felt unsafe, Dan. A place that I willingly go every opportunity I can. And they've chosen instead a place where both of their countries of origin and residence, the United States and the United Kingdom, have issued travel warnings because of the many dangers involving kidnapping and drug gang warfare and such. And may I also say, Dan, that Harry and Meghan are doing here exactly what Harry's beloved grandmother, Queen Elizabeth, pleaded with the couple not to do, exploiting their royal past and connections to Harry's family for personal gain, masquerading as important public figures, when in reality, bilingual public figures. Isn't that wonderful? Meghan can speak Spanish fluently. I speak Spanish fluently. I speak French fluently, have a French partner, live in French, and do the news in French. But I don't think that's such a great achievement, but obviously Meghan does. But they're masquerading as important public figures when in reality, they're social media influencers desperate to remain in the public eye, perhaps even to perform as a competitive court to the authentic royals, Dan.
Well, I think that's clearly what they're doing now. They have absolutely launched a competitive court, but what that means is it comes with a complete lack of transparency about who's funding them, about whether we're getting honest reporting about what really took place in Colombia. And I think it's despicable, actually, that the mainstream media are not asking these questions, but that's why we will. We did get a lot of OTT PDAs, Lee, a lot of it. Now, they were in the salsa capital of Colombia, Cali. But what was funny is that we've been seeing Harry and Meghan looking very miserable together of late. When they knew the cameras were on them, though, all of a sudden, they were the most loved up couple in the world. Watch. And there was so much of that OTT dancing, Lee. And I think for me, I don't believe it. It doesn't feel authentic. You know, when you see Catherine and William in public, there's something quite coy about them. They don't want to flaunt their love. So when you do get those moments, they feel very genuine. But with Harry and Meghan, it seems the opposite to me. When they think they're not being watched, they're completely miserable. But then they turn it on when they know they're on camera. But first, I've promised to only talk to you about products on this show that are actually life-changing. This one's a little bit more personal, but the fellas watching, you will completely get it. And ladies, like Suzanne, would do very well to treat their husband or boyfriend, because this really is a game changer. Us men want our grooming routine to be a one-and-done deal. So the days of using the same trimmer for your face and your nether regions are over, and this is thanks to our brilliant friends at Manscaped. They've come up with the ultimate package to keep your hairs trimmed from 12 till 6. Introducing the Beard and Balls bundle, featuring the Lawnmower 5.0 and the Beard Hedger. And I'm not talking about this sort of lawnmower, folks, but this product does provide precision trimming for all areas, even the sensitive ones, to get him as manicured as freshly cut grass. So I'm talking about a trimmer for the moneymaker, another for the boys downstairs, a trimmer that gets it right the first time while being gentle on the skin where it matters. With 2 interchangeable skin-safe blade heads, you can choose between a precise trim or a smooth finish, and it's waterproof too, which means you can use it in the shower without making a mess. That is really good news. Next, let me tell you about the beard hedger. Whether you're going for a neat stubble or a full-on beard, it has you completely covered. It features a titanium-coated stainless steel T-blade, 20 length options, so you just twist the zoom wheel to get the exact look you're going for. The beard hedger is also waterproof, so you can handle your beard grooming right in the sink or shower without worrying about water damage. Has 60 minutes of runtime, an LED charge indicator too, so you'll never be caught with low battery. This is such a gentle product, folks, so I can guarantee no more cuts. You'll keep your loved one happy, and this product will increase your confidence. The great news is today you will get 20% off and totally free shipping. You just have to use the code Outspoken at www.manscaped.com. I'll put the link in our YouTube and Rumble description. But to repeat, that's 20% off and free shipping with the code Outspoken at manscaped.com. No more juggling multiple tools or dealing with subpar results, just efficient, effective grooming wherever you need it. For the premium grooming experience, trust Manscaped.
Well, this is clearly being driven by Meghan because Harry was brought up in that same sort of stiff upper lip society where, you know, public displays of affection were not shown, and particularly the royal family behaved in a way that projected decorum. And really were an example in so many ways in etiquette and how to behave to people around the world. So this is clearly coming from Meghan. Harry is, you know, her willing, I don't know what you would call him, pawn in this, and he just goes along, and because perhaps he's afraid that she'll crack the whip. I don't know, but it's eye rolling. And Dan, I live in Palm Beach, and they were here for a polo match, and I can tell you by some people I know that attended that match that Meghan did the very same thing. When the cameras weren't on her, she was busy looking for a child to seize their hand, bring them into the picture, and then you know, on the front pages the next day in the newspapers, there it was Meghan with the child, looking as if, you know, she had known this child all along. But I knew because people told me that she had just looked for a prop child whose hand she could seize for the photo.
I've got some prop children in Colombia coming up to show you, actually. But firstly, there was so much more dancing, and I started to actually find this quite awful. Like, you're adults. There's nothing cute or endearing about this. Please just make it stop. Have a look. And of course, Lee, we are seeing the mobile phone footage, but you would see the official cameras there who are filming this all, and Meghan and Harry will no doubt use it in whatever commercial project they need to. But we did get some official Meghan dancing footage released. Watch.
Los duques de Sussex, Príncipe Harry y Meghan, visitaron el Centro Nacional de las Artes Delia Zapata Olivella, la infraestructura cultural más importante construida por el Ministerio de las Culturas, las Artes y los Saberes, ubicada.
And then, Lee, there were even moments, watch this, where Harry was dancing on his own. Now, as you say, where is the decorum in this? I'm finding it all just rather cringeworthy. Am I being unfair?
Not at all, Dan. I mean, that's the kind of thing that you see at fraternity and sorority parties, drunken fraternity
Yes.
parties, not at supposed official world tours where the participants are important public figures. I mean, that debased them. Poor Harry, what is he thinking? You really have to wonder, how could this guy's judgment have just evaporated like it has?
Well, as the Royal News Network tweeted about these official pictures of them looking all over each other, anyone else think they're trying a bit too hard to sell the love after CBS and the Day One video? The greatest indicators of a couple in love sometimes is the small gestures that happen to be caught on camera, not the ones done for the camera. And you contrast those official pictures, Lee, with this one, which shows Harry looking utterly miserable. And as Sabria Lone pointed out, she puts on a ridiculous grin. Meanwhile, he isn't even pretending to be happy anymore. This trip was a failure, costing taxpayers millions for no reason. Plus, I think he understands now they are not important. I don't want to see her on here, so I just want people to take a good look at his facial expression. And I think you could see it there, couldn't you, Lee? But clearly, after the first day, Harry must have got the memo. You're not looking happy. People are picking up on this. So we need you to start performing. Some lip readers, Lee, even looked at some of the video with Harry and Meghan. And apparently she says to him, hand. So he has to put out his hand immediately to hold her hand. So there was a performance going on, I guess is the point.
There was a performance going on. Dan, when I see that photo of Harry, it makes me think of some of the public appearances when his parents began to unravel. And
Yes.
The now king looking off in one direction with an unhappy look, and with the Princess of Wales looking off in another direction. And they were clearly not hiding. They weren't playing to the camera, and they didn't have Meghan Markle's sense of Hollywood and always being on. They were just being themselves. And Harry was being himself there, and until she got word of it and told him he had to man up and straighten up and fly right.
It was really interestingly that you mentioned what happened in Palm Beach, the couple using children as props, because that was certainly the case in Colombia. Lots of people furious about this, Lee, given how much they try and protect their own two children. Watch.
Los prestigiosos World's Best School Prizes, organizado por T4 Education, la plataforma global que reúne a más de 200,000 profesores en más de 100 países para transformar la educación. Su convicción de crear espacios de aprendizaje socioemocional y físico seguros ha motivado a sus alumnas y alumnos a desarrollar al máximo su potencial para aportar a la construcción de un proyecto de vida exitoso que les permita el crecimiento y el bienestar personal. En el marco de la visita de los duques de Sussex, príncipe Harry y Meghan, junto a la vicepresidenta y ministra Francia Márquez Mina, estuvieron visitando y compartiendo con las y los estudiantes del Colegio La Giralda, donde se destacó la importancia de integrar el bienestar.
So they're just a Pied Piper of children when you look at the official video, including, Lee, this crazy moment where we're meant to believe a little Colombian girl curtsies for Meghan, who, let's just remember, is no longer a working royal. Now, as Harry's grey suit on X pointed out, Lee, there is no way this sweet little girl would curtsy unless someone showed her how and told her to. If adults want to participate in this circus, that's fine, but exploiting children for PR is disgusting. What do you make of it, Lee? We'll see more pictures there of the kids all over them, apparently.
It's positively despicable, Dan. And particularly in light of the fact, not just that they used the child for a prop to curtsy to Meghan Markle, who's not a working member of the royal family. The Duke of Windsor used to require people to curtsy to his wife, who, unlike Meghan, never actually did have the HRH title, but nevertheless, it was equally as phony. And furthermore, Dan, if you'll recall, Meghan made great fun of the rituals and respects of the royal family. She made that very exaggerated curtsy and said in a demeaning voice, "Here I am, Queen Elizabeth." And so why would she even be interested in anyone curtsying to her?
Indeed. It was only once she left the royal family that all of a sudden she wanted those trappings of royal life. I think it's really interesting, by the way, you mentioned Wallis Simpson and the Duke of Windsor, because it certainly feels like there's parallels here. Harry's almost like, I couldn't give you the royal life that I promised you, so now I'm going to live a pretend royal life. It's very bizarre. I did want to show you, though, this clip from the Royal Mess YouTube, Lee, because there was quite a hilarious revelation that actually the poor kids, one of the reasons why some of them look so disappointed is that to gather them at the school, they were actually told that they would be meeting a big football star, and they were very disappointed when it was Harry and Meghan who turned up.
The only thing that I've really contributed at all that I've picked up is that I know that there was a group of students or whatever that were supposed to, I don't know, they were convinced that a Colombian soccer player was going to be there, like the most valuable player from Copa. And
oh my God.
And instead they got Harry and Meghan. So
no way. That's just brutal.
Are you freaking serious?
Yeah, it's just, what's the guy's name? Like James Rodriguez or something like that.
Yeah.
The MVP from Copa. And he was supposed to be there. They told everybody that he was going to be there, which is why they had this huge crowd. And then he didn't show up. They got Harry and Meghan.
Makes perfect sense, Lee, because there were not good crowds. People didn't show up.
From what I've read in the British papers, a lot of people in Colombia don't even know who they are, and quite frankly, don't care who they are. This was obviously on behalf of a government that is seeking to offset its reputation as being a corrupt and dangerous place. They wanted to bring, these figures who, by their visit, could portray that they could brag about and say Colombia is not a dangerous place. Look, Prince Harry and Meghan came here. But Dan, one thing I wanted to ask you about, if I may, if you'll permit me,
please,
is the shameless call for reparations by citizens. It wasn't by the government, as I understand. It was by some citizens, particularly in a free city where former enslaved Africans had settled in Colombia. They called to ask Harry, in particular, to apologize for slavery. And how shameless that Harry and Meghan would allow themselves to be put in a very precarious situation like that, precarious for the monarchy, precarious for the British nation, neither of which they represent. And here they are being used by this leftist government as a tool to push the UK toward paying slavery reparations, a movement based on misplaced historical grievances rather than present realities, and it borders on extortion. How despicable that they allowed themselves to be placed in that situation.
Absolutely, but I think they have chosen to, Lee. And what really concerns me about this is if you look at how they are really trying to align themselves with this vice president, one of the leading figures in the world calling for reparations. Actually, are we going to see a time in a couple of years where actually Harry and Meghan call for reparations themselves. Clearly, that is the path they're heading in. I think it is despicable. I think it's highly concerning for the royal family. And this is why, Lee, I will repeat again, and I'm sure you agree with me, King Charles III has to man up, and he has to consider stripping them of their titles. And Lee, this would be dramatic, but he even has to consider the line of succession, because these two are now putting the royal family at threat with a tour like this, which has this subtle call for reparations. And it's subtle now, but very soon it won't be subtle. So take action now.
Well, 100%, Dan. And what's interesting is, and I thought about this too, King Charles is now getting tough with his brother. And so that's interesting. So, and this couple have done so much harm that somebody has to clarify that Harry and Meghan no longer represent the monarchy. And I understand that,
Exactly, because how can that be the case, Lee, when he remains fifth in line to the throne?
No, exactly right. And I understand it's not as simple as, and I understand that the royal family are meeting in Scotland.
At Balmoral, yeah.
This is an agenda item to discuss, the problem of Sussexes and the titles. And I also understand that it would require more than, just a wish from the monarchy to do this.
Yes, it would have to be a change of law. But look, if the royal family wanted it, believe me, it would be a very popular law. I want to go back to day one of the tour, though. This is when Harry was particularly miserable. And look at this footage, Lee, because there's been lots of criticism about the fact that he put his arm around the interpreter and potentially made her feel uncomfortable. Watch this. Seems to be doing anything there not to talk to Meghan. And at Unremarkable on X wrote, Harry tries to be slick by placing his arm around the back of the translator. It's creepy, absolutely inappropriate and forward, and places this woman in an uncomfortable position. His body language is gross. The woman is just doing her job. It was an odd moment, wasn't it, Lee?
Was an odd moment. It's a moment that harkens of, Joe Biden's creepiness. You used the word creepiness. This is truly creepy at its best. And, you'll recall, and Americans have become familiar with this, that there's a distance generally between members of the royal family. And this underlines that, Harry is no longer a working member of the royal family, but still, you'll recall on Queen Elizabeth's visit, sometimes there were some exuberant people that had a lot of affection for her when she was meeting them publicly in America, and they would throw their arms around her, and that was, but she had the decorum not to recoil. But Harry is the opposite end of the spectrum. He's actually, leeching on to this woman in a most unseemly way. Once again, I have to say, wasn't raised like that. What's happened to this chap's judgment?
Very true. Very, very true. Now, there was also lots of criticism that Harry and Meghan were trying to cosplay Catherine and William on this trip. So you'll see this moment where they were playing the drums, and it felt, well, like they were trying to portray joy. But actually, when you look at their faces and you look at everyone in the room, it was actually a really miserable experience. Look, I was sort of trying to put on a smile there. Whereas you compare it to what happened with William and Catherine doing something very similar, and you see the true joy. And Royal News Network posted on X two similar events in similar parts of the world, and yet so different. In one, Meghan's too cowardly to admit lying about speaking Spanish, so every video is mute to conceal that, which comes across as exceptionally stupid in a video where they're playing drums. In the other, an adored prince and princess are greeted by massive crowds and participate in a drum performance where they bravely face criticism for their skills or lack thereof. Interesting, isn't it, Lee, when you compare and contrast?
Well, they don't come up to their to the midsections of the Prince and the Princess of Wales, and it's clear, and it must be agonizing for the couple, particularly Meghan, that even in the United States, the Princess of Wales outranks her in popularity, squashes her, eclipses her in popularity. And that's got to be a very hard pill to swallow. And they have to go off to these far-flung places where, cartoon characters don't make fun of them and comedians don't
Yes,
lampoon. And that's what this is all about.
it is.
It,
But barely anyone showed up, even though it was in Colombia, even though they might have been a novelty, barely anyone showed up. But the security operation was utterly extortionate and over the top, Lee. 3,000 police on duty. By the way, that cost was passed on to the largely poor population of Colombia, where over 36% of folk there live in poverty. But have a look at this convoy. And as Royally Sage posted on X, look at this ridiculous convoy when there are just a few people walking on the street and it is costing poor people $500,000. What are the people in this country getting from this? Nothing. And Lee, that security operation, I know Harry thinks he's making a clever point to Charles, but it was so over the top and unnecessary, wasn't it?
well, Dan, I've lived in Washington, D.C., and where it's at least twice a day you see the presidential motorcade going by, and that presentation that we just saw in Colombia eclipsed a presidential motorcade, and it was clearly all done for show for the Duke and Duchess, that most Colombians don't even know who they are. And I wonder if those Colombians know that their tax dollars went to pay for that theater.
Indeed, there was another side to the story, though. The hard leftists, Lee, were loving this tour. So Dr. Scholler, who I think is one of the most malignant forces in British public life, she wrote on X, as Meghan shines globally, a natural and engaging leader in her own right, the short-sightedness of the royal family in rejecting her is testament they failed to silence her. Harry and Meghan are at the Afro Women in Power Forum in Colombia with Colombia's Vice President, Francia Marquez, which brings together 400 female leaders from the Pacific region. But of course, the Daily Telegraph, which is a more establishment right-wing newspaper here, pointing out, Lee, how difficult it is for Harry to be connected to someone like Marquez. So I guess once again we see the hard left backing Harry and Meghan, which seems to be how it shakes down these days.
No, completely. And I don't know where Ms. Scholler thinks that Meghan is shining, but in the United
Which
States,
was a bit sweaty.
That's true. That's true. I can tell you this isn't there. The tour of the Sussexes in Colombia has not been front page news here, aside from a few predictable publications like People Magazine that always is fawning and to the Sussexes, and even their headlines had nothing to do with the important image of the Sussexes as public figures. I can tell you what some of their headlines were. Meghan Markle removes her earpiece and speaks Spanish on stage in Colombia. Oh, terrific. Let's have a standing ovation for her. Or how Meghan Markle is keeping kids, Prince Archie and Prince Lilibet, close during the Colombia tour. Or Meghan Markle and Prince Harry celebrate Afro-Colombian culture. Incredibly moving experience. But these are not, big, headlines, attention grabbing for things.
No, there's no mission, there's no message, and this is the problem with them, isn't it? It's all about them. I'd be embarrassed to be working for People magazine, by the way, though, pumping out that sort of propaganda. And we should point out, Lee, the only officially accredited journalist for the entire event to cover it for the world was from Harper's Bazaar, a softball fashion magazine, which I think says it all. Harry did make a couple of political points during this tour, though, even though I think it was Meghan who very much wanted the spotlight. But the problem is, Lee, yet again, he's talking about an issue he knows nothing about. This time, artificial intelligence.
AI is scary. And I think a lot of people are scared and uncertain. And I think one of the solutions to that is education and awareness, because it's becoming harder and harder to stem the flow from the source, and therefore really it comes down to all of us to be able to spot the true from the fake. Of course, in an ideal world, those in positions of power, responsibility and influence would be more responsible and take more accountability for spotting these things.
I mean, Alanis Morissette would be proud of the level of irony in that statement, Lee, because we know Harry and Meghan are two of the biggest purveyors of fake news in the world. They have never slapped down or publicly distanced themselves from the Sussex Squad, the biggest gang of internet trolls in the world that operate on their behalf. Yet there he is talking about the scourge of fake news and saying that powerful and responsible people should call it out. Well, he never called out the Sussex Squad going after Catherine, the Princess of Wales, incessantly, even though she was suffering from cancer at the time. How dare he?
How dare he? And did you catch then, many felt that those remarks were a sort of a veiled swipe at Elon Musk. And,
yes, definitely.
Definitely, Harry would be at odds with. Harry's talked about free speech. He talks about all these things, and as you say, he knows very little about them. And
because he tried to blame the recent riots, if you want to call them that, in the UK on online discourse. And we know he hates Elon Musk, so he's the opposite of a free speech champion. So, Lee, overall, this tour has been a disaster, hasn't it?
Overall, this tour has been a disaster. It certainly did not garner much attention in the United States, and it's been largely ignored by Colombians who either don't recognize or don't care about Harry and Meghan. And it's exposed them as, the complete other end from the royal family in terms of decor and dignity. It's exposed them as willingly exposing the country of the UK and the monarchy to harm through placing them in the line of fire on the question of reparations. There's absolutely nothing, the only thing to come of this was their own publicity. And on that, it seems to have failed, because even in the United States, it doesn't seem to be getting glowing marks. The only person who seems to give it glowing marks are Ms. Shola, as you referenced earlier.
Indeed, and when you've got Miss Shola on your side, I think actually you know that you're fighting the wrong side of the argument. But the reason I wanted to do this with you today, Lee, is because you are, of course, one of the honest and top royal commentators based out of the US. I don't feel like the mainstream media have properly covered this tour, and so it's very important that we do that within the independent media space. And so I really thank you for taking the time. I think we've provided some real insight into what actually happened in Colombia and why there were so many limitations too, because of the censorship. I mean, he can't say he believes in free speech, can he? Because of the censorship of his tour. So Lee Cohen, absolutely amazing to have you. And of course, you can read Lee in the Daily Telegraph, Fox News and The Sun. Always a pleasure to have him on Outspoken. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspokennewscom. www.outspoken.live.